Hey guys. Short lecture today. Just want to go over a couple things that we're going to quiz tomorrow. We have been on the Constitution and American government for 2 weeks, week and a half now. Just a couple things that you should have encountered a number of times in either lecture materials. Charlie Brown and Snoopy talked about it with you the other day. So just kind of going in, take your time, read carefully. It's not a bunch of questions. I think it's less than 15. Um, so they're worth a little more, 6, 8 points. So just take your time, read. All right. So you should definitely know what the Constitutional Convention was all about. Essentially, what had happened was the United States had had some problems with the Articles of Confederation, which was our form of government up to that point after the American Revolution, but before the first before the constitutional conventions, and they went there to try to fix it. So the Constitutional Convention initially is not a plan to start a new government; it's a plan to fix the government they have, and very very quickly it becomes clear that they can't. They can't agree on anything, and the only thing they can agree on is that the government that they've been sent to fix is probably broken without any chance of being repaired. So they decide to try something different. They formulate a constitution. And you guys know from your reading and lecture and everything else that that is not smooth sailing either. That takes them a long time, months and months and months and months in sweltering summer heat without air conditioning, and it's good times. So, um, delegates. Delegates are the individuals that were sent by the respective states to the Constitutional Convention. A delegate is like a representative. So those are the guys who were sent with initially the idea that the Articles of Confederation could be repaired, which didn't work out that way, thankfully. Ratification, or to ratify. That's what actually kind of makes everything official. It's the approval process for things like legislation and constitution and things like that. So they vote on the Constitution, but the Constitution is not immediately ratified. It's not immediately approved until enough states agree. So they kind of pass a draft, but it's not finalized until it's ratified. So uh, a Constitution is a type of document. It's a legal document that establishes a plan for governing. In this country, our Constitution establishes a republic. So we have that Republican form of government, not the political party, but the idea that the people will elect representatives who will in turn run the government rather than us directly deciding all laws like you would in a democracy. And hopefully, you got a chance to hear some of the arguments against that. There was a concern amongst the delegates at the first Constitutional Convention um, that essentially people were not smart enough to be in charge of their own government. And that is an argument that people still make today. The voting public, if you actually have a true democracy, that it requires people to be informed voters. And in many cases, they just aren't. So, um, having a republic kind of takes that potential for abuse away from the common people. So you still do have the people still making those choices, but it's ruled by representation rather than direct rule by the mob, as it were, like in democracy. So the preamble. A preamble is an introduction. The Constitution starts that preamble: "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Boom! And no, I didn't read that. That's memorized, and you're going to have to memorize it next year as an eighth grader. Boom, boom. So, good stuff. It's okay. There's a song, "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union," and it was playing in my head the whole time. So, a preamble is an introduction, and the preamble of the United States Constitution really does establish what the goals were in that document. The articles that follow, of course, the first article establishes the legislature, which that we talked about. The founding fathers believed that the legislature was the most important branch of government. That's why that one comes first. Article 1 is the legislature. So articles, it's just the way that they have broken it up, sections. So Article 1, Article 2 is Section 1, Section 2. It's synonymous, no big deal. The Bill of Rights was that first that grouping of those first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which now we've spent some time on. You guys should be pretty familiar with those. And essentially, they're tacked on at the end because not everyone's happy enough with the Constitution as it is. So in order to kind of make the Constitution really get where it needs to be, that was done on the promise of a Bill of Rights being kind of tacked on at the end to ensure that abuses of rights didn't occur as had under George III, the King of England. So, of course, some of the most famous ones to come out of that are things like the free press, and of course, press, squish, no. Press is the gathering and publishing or broadcasting of news for the purpose of, getting out information, dissemination of information. So they didn't want that restricted because in countries with monarchies, the press was highly restricted. And even today, you have things like, for example, we do not have a governmental broadcasting entity the way that they do in England. In England, you have the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, and they're associated with the government. And so we don't have that here. The press is free. It is independent of government influence and intrusion in most cases. Remember, there is some fine print now. If you're like, I want to click, post-military secrets, they're going to be like, no. So, remember, your right to assembly does kind of stop as soon as you throw that first rock. Assembly is the right for people to meet and gather peacefully. So as soon as you no longer are a peaceful gathering, then you have become, a mob, and your group is not called an assembly. Your group is called, a riot. So one of those rights that's assured to us, but within common sense limitation. Now, and the best part about that is, because common sense is so rare that it should be a superpower, the founding fathers didn't say, "Oh yeah, well you have the right to assemble and it'll be great." They spelled out, "This is how that works." They were very clear so that you had, these are the lines. Stay in your lane. So a jury is, of course, a group of people who are sworn to give verdict at a trial, either a grand jury or an actual trial. And you do have those, a number of rights granted you, including things like a jury trial, and that the jury would be of your peers, and that the jury would be local to the crime, and things like that. Other things, amendments. To amend means to kind of go back and change or add an addition, an amendment. It's where you go back and you amend it. You change it a little bit. You're like, ooh, I said that, but it's better this way. Yeah, this is the new way. So that's an amendment. Do remember that before you have the Constitution, which establishes the federal government, and so you kind of have a federal government and the state governments, kind of underneath it. Under the Articles of Confederation, essentially you just had a bunch of countries that had agreed to not fight each other, and it was a much more loose association. It was a loose confederacy. So the idea was that they would band together for things like defense, but the reality was the Articles of Confederation didn't work very well because some states were like, oh yeah, I don't want to pay that, and other states were like, well, I already paid and that's not fair. And they were fighting about things like taxes and tariffs and interstate commerce and money, and well, why is Virginia's money worth more than my money? That's not fair. And so without that establishment of a constitution that kind of unified the whole, you just kind of would have fallen to bickering between the groups, was the concern. Now, do remember that wonderful word bicameral. Bicameral is the way that our legislature is set up in Article 1. Bicameral means two houses. So we have the upper house and the lower house. The upper house is the Senate. The lower house is the House of Representatives. Um, this is where the representatives are. These are where your senators are. And all of it together is called Congress or the legislature. If you kind of remember those kind of things, I feel like you would be super well prepared for anything that the quiz throws at you. Have a very lovely evening.